Hello and welcome to hashtag Channel EEO, Conversations in Pursuit of Equal Opportunity. My name is Teresa Turner. I am President and Lead Consultant for Synchronized Resources, Inc., an organization that specializes in helping companies with their equal opportunity programs. The purpose of this podcast is to open conversations related to divisive topics that are difficult to discuss, like topics that start with EEO, affirmative action, diversity and inclusion, and a host of other terms that we've been quite used to bantering around in the past. So, our topic today is winds of change and the implications for the disability communities, a call to action. And it is my pleasure to introduce Kevin McCloskey, Senior Director, Leadership and Workforce Development, at the disability not-profit organization Disability Belongs. I've known Kevin for quite some time. We've been a member of the NIOG network for ages, probably longer than we should share, but we come together often, and I'm thrilled that he has agreed to join in on this podcast. And to give you a little bit about his background, Kevin is the Senior Director, Leadership and Workforce Development at the disability advocacy not-for-profit organization Disability Belongs. Kevin has more than a decade of experience in the human resources and workforce development industries. He has worked with large employers such as Pepsi, Frito-Lay, Synchrony, and more to develop programs to actively attract, hire, and more importantly, retain individuals with disabilities. In his role, he addresses critical gaps in disability employment by partnering with businesses, workforce agencies, not-for-profits, and individuals to drive meaningful progress in workplace inclusion, delivering personalized support and guidance, and training on best practices for hiring and retaining a workforce that includes disabled people and their allies, as well as accessibility in leadership management ranks. So with that, Kevin, again, thank you so much for joining in and lending your expertise to this conversation.
Yeah, Teresa, thanks for having us. You get a nice introduction on myself and my organization. So glad to be here. I think the only thing you missed is we shared a couple dance floors. We had a lot of fun on the
I
dance
was going to
floors.
frame that up, but I was curious if you would.
At some of those conferences. Yeah, good times. Always nice to be with you.
Great. Well, why don't you share a bit more about Disability Belongs?
Sure. Yeah, I've been with Disability Belongs just under a year now. And we drive cultural and policy change to ensure our full representation and influence, which creates a more accessible, equitable, and inclusive society. So we do a lot of great things here at Disability Belongs. You can check us out at disabilitybelongs.org. But one of the things I do here is the leadership and workforce development. So as you mentioned, on the workforce development side, working with employers, nonprofits, different organizations, really to increase the employment of people with disabilities. We can go into the numbers, but we all know there's a huge gap between those who are disabled and those who are not disabled when it comes to employment. So we're looking to really, strengthen that gap and really prove that people with disabilities can do the job just as good, if not better than those without. One of the things we do here also that I oversee is our leadership program that we're actually interviewing for right now. So our leadership program brings in individuals at an entry-level career, and help them get the professional skills, leadership skills, and networking opportunities to go out and find successful jobs. So we do anything from writing resumes to cover letters to how to write speeches to how to put accessible presentations together to writing policy memos. And the fellows also get the opportunity to go through a rotational model and learn all about what we do here at Disability Belongs, including working in entertainment media, working in policy, and all the great things we do. So it's a really great program, and we see really great results when it comes to employment. Because as I said before, people with disabilities are willing and able to do the job. It's really just got to go out and recruit people with disabilities, and you'll see.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the entertainment component? I saw a post on LinkedIn where you were talking about that. And I found that very interesting because we have a friend and colleague who is in Hollywood making sure that sets are accessible, for actors and actresses with disabilities so that they don't hire people that are able-bodied and train
Yep.
them to act like they have a disability, and they take the reverse model. And when I read about your program, how does that tie in, or does it, as far as the exposure and what the objective is?
Yeah, it absolutely does. That's again a piece of what we do here, and it's all around disability inclusion and how to be disability effective. And I'll steal that from our friend Rob, who talks about being veteran effective, right? No one be veteran
Right.
friendly or inclusive. Be effective, like effective in your
Exactly.
programs, effective in your recruiting. So what we do here in the entertainment space is a couple of things. Really promote authentic and diverse, inclusive portrayals of people with disabilities. So we read a lot of scripts, do a lot of work on making sure if disability is on the screen, which frankly, it's not a lot, right?
Right.
We want to make sure it is authentically represented. And also, we're looking to increase representation of people with disabilities on the screen. And I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but I believe it's a single digit of main characters, actors have a disability. So we are looking to increase that representation. Also, I talked about our leadership program. We also have a couple of leadership programs as well in the entertainment space, and they get the opportunity to pitch their projects, learn about how to pitch better, how to make their products better, and more importantly, get the opportunity to get their pieces looked at by the industry. We have an amazing amount of studio partners that we work with. And I'll talk briefly about something that I was involved during National Disability Employment Awareness Month in Dean.
That's a mouthful,
It's
right?
such a mouthful. National Disability Employment Awareness Month in Dean.
Otherwise known as Indeem,
In Dean.
right?
So in October, we had some of our studio partners come in, and we had the opportunity for, I think, about eight, no, probably, let's see, two, four, five, probably 16, I think, individuals got the opportunity to pitch their projects to studio people who buy projects. So they
Right.
had the opportunity to pitch their projects and then get real-time feedback on those projects. And one thing I will say is, like, first of all, you have to talk about me, but the talent within the disability community is just phenomenal. And again, we're doing our best to create opportunities for these individuals who want to get into, the entertainment media space. But also, I want to give a huge shout out to our studio partners who are, again, listening to these pitches and providing some amazing feedback. I'm not sure if you know this about me. I am a failed screenwriter, as I like to call myself. I spent 2 years, 2 years in LA trying to sell my scripts with an agent. But that again, the industry partners we work with are giving amazing feedback and really helping our disabled creators put together some really great projects so they can go and pitch it and be a part of the entertainment media community. So that's a little bit about what we do. Also, a lot of consulting on sets, scripts, film reviews, so on and so forth. That's a nice part of what we do here at Disability Belongs.
Well, and I think that's fantastic because, again, having yourself seen and portrayed in social media, TV, movies, it is so important. And like you said, it is still sorely missing when it comes to the disability community. And number two, just the access to movie theaters that are accessible to a full range of folks that want to take in the entertainment, on whatever level it's being developed.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I always like to remind people when we talk about disability inclusion, we talk about it from the workplace angle a lot, but it's important to remember that that inclusion really starts in the community. How accessible is our community? And we talked about the topic of this conversation is really driven by winds of change. So before we go too much further, and without turning this into a legal lecture or any kind of a political debate or divisive conversation, I just simply want to state that this conversation is needed because there are a lot of significant changes taking place that impact the disability community directly. And those are cuts not only in what I call the guardrails, and that is prior compliance obligations that were designed specifically to make sure that organizations weren't discriminating because of one characteristic or another. So when we look at the changes that are taking place, we're looking at an era where we won't be able to even ask a disability status. There's some inferences that we're winding back on accommodations or the requirement for accommodations and what those would look like moving forward. So we need to be aware of the fact that as these guardrails are minimized at the federal or local level, community groups like Disability Belongs are going to be the organizations that help fill that gap. So, Kevin, how have some of these issues, the political winds and back and forth impacted your messaging, and more importantly, the receptivity of companies to still engage in these conversations?
Yeah. And I'll say what, we mentioned entertainment. We also, at the heart of our organization, we're our advocacy organization, right? So we have a policy department, which has been very busy this year, you can say. So
Yes.
our policy department is a lot of work, and I will give hats off to them because they've been constantly busy with responding, sending out letters, putting stuff on our action center. If you haven't checked out our action center on our disabilitybelongs.org, it's an amazing place to educate yourself. I am not a policy person. I've never been. I've worked directly with employers. I've worked with people with disabilities, including myself. And I've always been on the entertainment side, really making that change. And what's been really awesome coming to Disability Belongs is learning about policy, not just disability policy, because as we know, most policy and disability policy affects everyone in some way. So our approach to policy advocacy is, working with everyone, right? So we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We collaborate with diverse stakeholders to achieve our policy goals around disability inclusion. So again, been very busy writing letters and updating our action center, working with different advocacy coalition groups in the disability community has been amazing. But again, like if you are really kind of, you can read the news, you can watch the news, there's tons of stuff out there. Come to disabilitybelongs.org, check out the Policy Action Center, and you can get educated on what things are happening in the world right now and how you can take action on it, what you need to do. There's many ways I was not aware of that you can do to contact, your local representatives, your national representatives, whatever it is. You can use that opportunity to do that there. So it's been, again, like it's been very busy, but what I always would love to point out is that, disability issues, especially around employment and policy, have always been historically a bipartisan issue. So a lot of
Exactly.
stuff has always happened from both sides of the aisle. And what I will say is, we've worked a lot over these past years. And one thing that comes to mind is a DEI training we did together. And education is so important all across the board. Just, looking at things different from a different view, right? There's always two sides of the story. You got to look at both sides. So we did a DEI training, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And the first question was, what is DEI, right? We kind of asked, what do you think DEI is? And it's amazing what people think something is, what it really truly is. So we got to go with that education. You got to really learn what it is, what it affects, how it affects you, how it affects your company, how it affects your people around you. So I think that's very important. So I think that's one of the best things you really can do is just go out and educate yourself as much as possible and see how some of these regulations, some of these things currently going on do affect, the people around you, the people you work with, and the people you love. So I think that's very important to do. And again, advocacy here at Disability Belongs is very important. And check out that action center to learn more about different things happening right now.
And Kevin, I'm glad you brought up that action center because again, as part of the changes and the upheaval right now, a lot of the websites that were formerly available that provided a lot of guidance and counsel and accessibility and accommodation at the federal government level, those have been taken down, or a lot of those resources have. Whether they'll come back or what time frame they'll come back, who knows, especially with a shutdown in play. So I
Yep.
think it's important, and I'll continue to share, organizations like Disability Belongs that is working both on the policy side, the educational sector side, just in general, working strongly in the disability employment sector. And they have a lot of resources that I'm sure, are homegrown resources, i.e., they're not going to be limited because the government decided to scroll back on some of the open resources that were available. Because that is something that is, really missing is reliable resources. So I'm glad you shared that information. And I hope listeners will make note of the website address, and Kevin will repeat that here frequently. But we'll move along and talk about as far as moving forward. What programs do you have coming up in relation to workforce development? I know you have different cohorts, apprenticeship type programs and things of that nature. Why don't you talk about the levels of programming and training that you offer, both directly for candidates for employees and then for the organizations that you train and work with to help increase or rewire maybe their thinking related to disability?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, education really is key. I always say, we live in this disability bubble where we talk to different disability people with disabilities, we talk to different organizations, we work with each other, we educate each other. Outside that bubble of disability is a whole new world of people who don't know a
Thanks.
lot about disability. And again, that education is so key to understand it. And my favorite job, a part of my job or part of my career is going and doing trainings and like, going to conferences and just watching light bulbs pop up. People coming to me after the conference or the session saying, I have a disability, didn't even realize it. I didn't realize this was accommodation. I didn't realize this. So that again, education is really important. And to answer your question, so our leadership program that we're currently in our fall cohort, currently recruiting and interviewing for our spring cohort. Again, we bring in about 8 to 12 individuals with disabilities and help them with professional development skills, leadership skills, and then help them network and find employment. And one thing I will say that, again, when I say what I do for a job, to someone I don't know or someone I've never told what I do before, it's always that like charity response of like, oh, it's so nice what you do for the people I'm working with right now are way smarter than I am, way qualified to do just amazing work. Our leadership program has just amazing individuals who have gone on to do great things. And again, currently cohort will go on to do great things as well. And again, we focus a lot on some of that cover letter, resume, how to find a job things, because one, that's difficult and something you're really never taught. I've worked on the HR side of like why you're asked this specific question, but like no one's ever telling someone who interviews like how to answer why tell me about a mistake you made or something like that. So that's really important to kind of start with some of that education and let the job seeker or the applicant understand what's going on the other end. So we do a lot of that stuff, which I think is really important, resumes, cover letters, but we focus on leadership skills because we have individuals, again, who have gone for their masters, have tons of experience, and we want to help them be leaders and continue disability effective practices into their careers. But one thing I do say, and I want to bring up education again, is a lot of these individuals are just phenomenal. Again, phenomenal, but what they really struggle with sometimes is how to work in a workplace with my disability. Right? It's not, I can do the job, I have the skills, I have the experience, I'm amazing at it. I have all this, history. I've done some college work, I've done some real work. But the problem is really sometimes how do I do this job with needing an accommodation? How do I do this job with letting someone know I need to take a doctor's appointment? How do I talk about my disability? Do I need to talk about my disability? And that's what's really the favorite part of the leadership program for me is bringing all these individuals together. And there's always someone who's like, I've never been in a space with so many people with disabilities. So it's like great to like have that. Sorry, I'm gonna cry here. I'm gonna cry. My
We're
fingers up.
like that too.
I'm gonna cry. But it's great to have people come in and have that community to like bounce off ideas and learn from each other. And that's where we come in and talk about the accommodation process. We talk about what's, the legal, blah, 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 legal, but how to really advocate for yourself and be successful in the how to advocate for yourself and be successful in the workplace. And that's something we really, really are impactful about. And as I choke my tears here, I'll go over to the employers because it's the same thing with employers. I've been training employers forever, and they're like, "Oh yeah, and what I love about the whole, what's going on with the current administration and the different regulations is, 503 came out, and 503 was a really huge part of my career. I started working with Pepsi back then, and a bunch of other amazing employers, and that kind of prompted those employers to be more proactive in going out and hiring people with disabilities, right? So we saw that, and it really helped my career. And then I always struggled still in the sales process of like talking to employers and being like, oh, you're supposed to do this. But a lot of those companies were like, how do we get around these regulations? Again, Pepsi
Exactly.
was one who like went right in, and many companies went right in, which was great. But a lot of companies tried to figure out how to get around them. So that was one problem. And then the DEI boom came along, and I was like, oh, great. This is people with disabilities are going to have a good opportunity here. But guess what? I read all these DEI pledges about this and that, but no disabilities, no mention of disabilities. Sometimes it eventually would make its way into the CEO pledge or whatever. So disability is again kind of forgotten in the DEI thing. And now the DEI stuff has kind of gone away. There's a rebranding, there's things you can and can't do, whatever we want to call it. And now it's, like I want to reach out. I'm like, hey, like disability still law. You still have to do this. You still do this after this. Let's talk about it. And they're like, oh no, we want to stay away from some of that stuff right now. So it's like disability is always like the forgotten one, or the one people are scared to talk about, scared to recruit for, whatever it is. There's always pushback. And it's unfortunate because again, with the companies I've worked with and the work I've done, I've seen so much success. And it's because those companies really said, all right, let's do this. Let's figure it out, as they do with any other project, whether it's, putting a new product out or putting a new system in. If you put some really people power behind it and a lot of just actually make it work, put it together, make it work, I can guarantee you that you'll see some great results when you go out and actually recruit and hire people with disabilities.
Well, I've got a story to share since you mentioned, about the workplace and people with disabilities sometimes having a difficult time navigating the workspace, given that they have a disability. So I'll keep this brief. I met a gentleman on LinkedIn through the various chats. He was born deaf, still profoundly loss of hearing, although he says he can hear slightly because of his ocular devices. And he was talking about, and the reason he caught my eye was because he was being candid, very candid, about his experiences applying for a job, needing an accommodation for hearing. And I am telling you, I got to the point where I was like, let's meet and talk about this. Let's see if I can help. And the problem is, he's probably not getting through the ATS system as quick as other people are, but he's getting through
Yeah.
because he gets interviews scheduled. And then he requests an accommodation. And then he shows up for the Zoom interview where there's supposed to be an interpreter and nada, no interpreter. And this happens over and over. So the question there is there a shortage of interpreters? And whose responsibility? And is that part of the reason that folks aren't getting interviewed because folks are afraid of the accommodation that's necessary? And another comment he made one time when we were discussing all of this, he prefers remote work. And I questioned, I said, well, I work a lot by myself and, I crave the interaction sometimes. And he said, well, you've never been deaf in a workplace.
Mhm.
And he said, I'm always the last to know everything. And he said, it's the most isolating feeling in the world.
Yeah.
So how do we break down those kind of things? And it's not just him. I mean, people are being very candid. Members of the disability community, professionals applying for jobs they've held in the past, and it's like a closed door. So my fear is, absent the guardrails, i.e., roll back on some of the affirmative action obligations, what do we as employers need to do, or consultants like me that have an opportunity to speak to this space with the companies I engage with? I mean, is there any,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I can do a whole podcast on accommodations. But I tell you, like one of the first things we do when we work with employers, or yeah, what we do is look at their accommodation process from an external person. And I will tell you, 9.5 out of 10 times, that accommodation process does not work. And I'll tell you a few stories. So one, you usually see like, oh, if you need an accommodation to apply, call this number. If you need an accommodation to apply, email, right? So there's one huge company I worked with before that said on their website, right? If you need an accommodation for this application, call this number. And there was no number listed after it. No number. So they had the wording, but there's no. And then I brought this to their attention. They're like, well, there's a number. And I was like, well, no one's calling it. So that's one. And then like there's sometimes you'll email and the email will come like will come back and the away message will be from like the chief diversity officer or something like that, who no way has time to take requests for accommodations. Or I love when you call a number, the number's not working, it's a full mailbox. Or my favorite is when you actually get someone, you're like, oh, I need to request an accommodation for my application. And they're like, what? But
Well,
how am I supposed to do that? I don't know how to do that. Let me call someone. And then you're put around and doing a million different calls or hung up on. That's what I tell employers, like, take a look at your accommodation process because you're immediately, most of these processes, you're immediately telling people with disabilities not to apply to your jobs because there's no access to asking for that accommodation. So that's an external thing, something we definitely need to work on. Again, 9.5 out of 10 times. If you're listening and you're in HR, if you work for a company, check your process right now and go through it. Is it effective? Because I'm sure it probably isn't. And then there's
and
yeah, go ahead.
when I wanted to say, and monitor your automatic responses, because my friend shares with me frequently the responses he gets from the automated systems. And in a few of them, and I'm not lying, I was like, "Oh, I thought I've seen it all." Well, I hadn't, because he checked the box for an accommodation. And then he said 30 minutes, he got a response saying, we acknowledge that you requested accommodation. We're not sure that we can fulfill it. And your accommodation request does not delay our decision making with respect to this job. That
Interesting.
was a real response from a
Yeah.
major
Yeah.
corporation.
I'm not surprised, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. That's unbelievable. I will, yeah. So I'll tell you another story is we were working with this company looking at their accommodation process, and it was basically a Google form where people filled out. But what happened, apparently, it was the only point during the application where an applicant can ask a question. So like 90% of the things that came into this accommodation request were nothing related to an accommodation. So guess what? They stopped looking at it. They stopped
No.
looking at it. And I think they were looking at it, I'll say once a week. I feel like it was more, but they looked at it once a week. So if I'm someone who's requesting a job, which typically, kind of fills up pretty quickly, some of these jobs, right? And I request that and no one's looking at my request for a week, then I'm not going to get that opportunity as everyone else does that doesn't need the accommodation, right? So that's that. Internally, processes are getting better, what I've seen. But one thing I will, tell employers to do is make sure it's an internal and I'm sorry, and not internal. Make sure it's an interactive process when you have your accommodations. Just like the example you use, being like, "Oh, I saw the request. We can't do that." That's not acceptable at all. It should be a
Right.
process, right? Like this is what you requested. Let's have a conversation of what you requested, why you need that, and come up with a solution. Again, and this is for applicants and employees with disabilities as well, you're not always going to get the best accommodation that you need. Hopefully you do, and I wish you do, but like there's got to be some kind of guidance, right? It's called a reasonable accommodation. It's got to be
Exactly.
reasonable. It's different for a company of 10 people than it is for a company of 15,000 people cost wise. So really the HR should have that interactive process where you're learning what accommodations are best, doing your research, work with community-based organizations, work with disability organizations that understand what those accommodations could look like. Sometimes we just don't take that extra step because it's too hard, it's too difficult. We can just hire this person over here. When you're losing out again on a population and community that
Exactly.
is so great. And again, I've seen it firsthand, and I'm someone with a disability, so it's important to again have that interactive process. And I think a lot of companies do get scared. Some companies are doing it so great right now, which is nice, but again, it's not a yes or no. It's how do we make this work? And when it comes to accommodations, I always say, like, as a manager, I've managed people pretty much my whole life. Like, you should know what makes your employees tick, what makes them do their best work, and you should do your best as a manager to provide that to them. Again, I can't provide every, satisfy every request that comes in, but I will do my best to make sure you are able to do your best and I will give you stuff. I always go back to like the pandemic, we all shut down. Most of us got the opportunity to work from home. We got computers sent to us. We got, paid for internet. We got this, we got extra screens. We got all this stuff. None of us had to fill out, papers of medical requests, go to our doctor, get something signed off, go through the whole process. It was just given to us because that's what we needed to be successful. So again, accommodations, I understand there's a fear of like expensive, and I get that. And some are for sure. Some things are expensive, but there should be that interactive process where you built in that every other system that you do, build in an accommodation process in those systems that are currently working. And again, I recommend testing them if, a lot, if not yearly, to make sure they're working correctly. And like
And
another thing,
my
like I said, I could do a whole podcast on accommodations, but make sure like look at how many are requested and how many are approved. And if you're not
Exactly.
a,
I started to say, look at
yeah,
those requests versus what's approved. And by the same token, look at the overall applicant flow, see how many folks identified with a disability, and see how many of those actually got through for any kind of engagement with an actual
yep,
human.
absolutely. That
Well,
was
on
it.
that note, yeah, I think as you indicated, we could schedule several more, and we will throughout the years. But I do want to wrap up with just a few points. Again, the call to action. There is so much going on in the space. I'm a consultant in the space. And I tell you what, I wake up one day ready to say something, and the next day I have to say, thank goodness I didn't say that yesterday because it's already changed. So we all
Yeah,
have a hand in educating ourselves and really looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, how much do I really know about disability inclusion now? And how prepared am I to come up to speed with what I need to know to be a good advocate and ally moving forward? Because more is going to be demanded of community-based organizations like Disability Belongs, consultants like Kevin, and even family members and things of that nature that may have to step up and help with some transportation needs and things like that as we go through these shifting times. The other thing we want to be aware of is strengthen your networks.
absolutely.
Make it possible for employees to get together and have actual experiential experiences, conversations with people with disabilities.
Hmm. Yeah,
Because it's one thing to sit back and talk about something that you've never, when someone says, well, do you have a friend or family member with disabilities? No, not really. Well, get disability curious and attend some of the conferences that are out there. And with that, Kevin, do you have anything else you want to add as far as the personal action items that we need to take?
Wow, that went quick. So much more to say.
I
I'll say
know.
though, I think most of your audience would be employers. I'm assuming, is that correct?
Employers, educators,
Yeah. So we know the 503, they're looking to take away the 7% utilization goal and
right?
removing actually self-IDing as a person with disability.
Yeah.
Um, where that's again, that's all compliance. And unfortunately, I don't think many employers were hitting that 7% goal. But what I do want to point out, and I hope if anyone's listening right now, it's why aren't we sharing disability employment data? Again, there was the DEI. You go on anyone's website and you see all these wonderful numbers about everything except for disability. There was never, hey, we hired this many people with disabilities the last 4 years, or this is the increase we made percentage wise. And I don't see that. So when that 7% utilization goal goes away, hopefully it won't. We put it through our action center. We sent letters. They're definitely reviewing it right now, which is nice. But why aren't we sharing that? So if you're doing a great job out there of hiring people with disabilities, say it, say it loud, market it. It's still law. So it's different from all this other stuff that's going now. It's still law. You're still supposed to be actively recruiting people with disabilities and making those partnerships in the community. And what I will say is you can do, we actually have some resources that we did for Indeem. One is 10 tips to increase disability employment. You can find those on our website, disabilitybelongs.org. But what you really have to do is you can do a million things to be disability effective. But I tell you right now, go out and create partnerships in your community. Go out and hire people with disabilities and recruit people with disabilities. You'll recruit, they'll interview, they'll apply, they'll get hired, and they'll do a great job. And I've seen it time and time again with employers who have bought into it and understand the importance of this population. So go out and recruit people with disabilities, create those partnerships with those organizations in your community, and that will lead to success. So again, hopefully, the changes to the regulation will, be heard, and some of those comments will be heard, and those changes will not be made. But
Right.
more importantly, go out there, like educate yourself on disability as we did with DEI and that small group that we did. and really understand the power of this community. And I'm sure you may even be part of that community. So again, education is key.
I agree. And one thing, little ironic comment on the reporting. I find it ironic that we had 3 affirmative action programs. The executive order for females and minorities was eliminated. We still have the affirmative action program for vets and individuals with disabilities. And federal reporting obligations, we report on females and minorities, the EEO1 report. We report on veterans, but there's no
But
federal report requirement for disability counts and
yep,
accountability.
left off,
So,
left
yeah.
off.
And I think that makes it more important for companies to get together so that we do have information and that organizations agree to share it, even in an anonymous way. That can be done to where we have benchmark data. Because if they take away
Yeah,
the, self-ID and things of that nature, data is going to be a problem.
correct. And I'll also say with, there's many companies have some funds left over from they can't use it now. They can use it for disability. So if you have funds, you're looking, what can I do with these funds that I was going to use for this
Exactly.
training? What was I going to use this program? What was I going to do? Again, still law. So come out, reach out to Disability Belongs, and we can start with some education. I'll open up your eyes, and I promise you, you will see the importance of hiring people with disabilities and the wonderful outcomes that it will bring you as an employer. Because again, I've done it time and time again. You recruit people with disabilities will get hired and do a great job. I can promise that.
Well, again, Kevin, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I think we're both fast talkers too. So we covered a lot of information
Our
in a
jaw,
short
yeah.
period of time.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
appreciate you. And again, we'll talk again very soon. And I will pass along the information on my website when I post the information on this podcast so that folks know where to reach you.
All right, Teresa, always nice to see you. Thanks for talking. Appreciate our friendship.
I appreciate it as well, Kevin, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.